Good afternoon. This is the Florida Department of Health Biomedical Research new grantee webinar. We started these grantee webinars last year as a way of discussing the administrative side of grant management and to hopefully provide some tips and pearls of wisdom that will help you so that you can better understand what needs to be submitted and that we can more quickly process your invoices each quarter. So today's webinar is intended for the new grant awardees and other key representatives that support the initiation, management, and closeout of research grants. The agenda for today's webinar is to provide a brief overview of the program, but to spend the majority of the program, and to spend the majority of the rest of the time discussing grant startup, guidance, reporting requirements, and tips to assist you in required paperwork. You are encouraged to send questions to the webinar chat mailbox throughout the webinar, and we will answer all questions. All feedback is appreciated. We take into account feedback for funding opportunity announcements, for streamlining our processes when we can, and for you to give us pearls of wisdom too. So working together, we will have a great grant cycle. So this is, we're going to talk very briefly about Bankhead Coley, King, and Live Like Bella projects, just to give you a bit of historical. Bankhead Coley, cancer research. We had 156 grant applications that were received for fiscal year 18 to 19, and 5 were awarded. That equals about not quite 10%. 15 were awarded. Excuse me. So you can see the number of applications in blue, the grants awarded in yellow, and the total amount awarded in orange. King, which is why we're here today. For fiscal year 18-19, there were 88 applications received and 10 were awarded. So that was roughly about 11%, a little over 11%. And just to reiterate, we know that we're still in the execution process, so it's important to have this conversation now. With a change in leadership, we were unable to award the grants until our state surgeon general came on board, and then in his second day, the award letters were finalized and sent out. And we don't expect having that problem again. All right, Live Like Bella. Live Like Bella is a pediatric cancer program, and it's named after a little girl who passed away from cancer. It's part of a larger organization, so if you want more background on the Live Like Bella, you can go to their website. They're only in their second year, and for 18-19, there were 18 grant applications and 10 were awarded. So roughly 55% of the applications were awarded. All right, now we are going to talk about you've been awarded a grant. It may be your first time, you may be seasoned, but this webinar is intended to help clarify questions you might have, as well as some things that have changed in the post-execution process. But so we're going to be going through these steps, and I'm going to introduce you to Karen Schlegenberger, who is our lead budget coordinator for biomedical research, and a grant manager, and she will continue on with some important information. Karen?
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. All right. Most of you are probably currently in this pre-execution phase right now, and some of the things that I'll be going over, you've probably already done, but I'll go over it anyways in case there is anybody that is not that far yet. So, along with your award letter, you should have received 2 attachments. The first one was a financial conflict of interest that the principal investigator must sign regarding their research. And this also pertains to their immediate family and other personnel that's on the grant. Usually the normal standard answer is no, that there is no financial conflict of interest. Occasionally there is a yes. And if that is the case for you, you simply must have an administrative process in place to identify and resolve any possible conflict that might affect the objectivity of your research, as it's very important to protect the grant from bias. Secondly, okay, there's a very good chance, and this is probably the case for everybody, is that the award amount was actually less than what you requested in your grant application. Don't be alarmed. This is completely normal. It's just a mechanism for us to be able to fund additional grants. Cuts are taken across the board, so it's applied evenly to everybody. If this is the case for your grant, a little extra work is going to have to be put in when it comes to the budget, as you'll have to change the budget that was in your original grant application or proposal, and we'll have to scale it down just a little bit. That might require possibly changing some of the aims. They might need to be revised, as you won't be able to do everything that you had planned to with less money being funded. But these should not affect the original intent of your grant, because that is exactly why it was awarded to you, to be selected. So please keep that in mind. You should have been contacted by your grant manager or your grant liaison to ask you what term you would like for your grant. The mechanism of support for your grant will automatically indicate the maximum allowed term. Usually it's going to be 6 months for a bridge grant to possibly 5 years for a clinical research project. So you can have less than that if you would like. That's going to be your prerogative, but just note that it will not be able to be more than the maximum allowed, as was indicated in your funding opportunity announcement. Okay, now what is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to try to convince you that budget, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Numbers, yes, we can go there. All right, we are looking at a real-life example of one of my grants. And one of the confusing things for people is that we do everything based on a state fiscal year, which is going to be July to June. And I do realize that not all of the agencies that we deal with are on that type of a fiscal year, so sometimes it's hard for them to wrap around their fiscal year with our fiscal year, and it can get very confusing, I must admit that. And then throw the calendar year in on that, and then it really gets confusing. All right, so what we're looking at here, this is a 3-year grant or 36 months, but we have used 4 budget columns. And that, as I said, is because it's based on our state fiscal year, July to June. And yes, I had to make some manual adjustments to this after it had been submitted to me. So we were actually hoping that we could get started a little earlier than we were able to. So in this case, year one is going to be September 1st of 19, to June 30 of 20, and that's a total of 10 months. Year two, fiscal year two, is a straight July to June, a full 12 months. Column 3 represents a full 12 month period, a July to June. And then the fourth column actually makes up the difference. So we're starting in July and August of the final year. So that 2 months added to the 10 still gives you 36 months, or this is still a 3-year budget. So it's 3 years, yes, but we're using 4 years because of the requirements we have to break it down by state fiscal year. That can get confusing. But I do want you to know that the important thing to remember is that we are going to be monitoring your budget on the very last column, the total budget column for each of your budget categories. We will not be holding you to expenditures broken down by fiscal year like you have it on this plan, this tentative budget plan. This is for planning purposes only. One of the things that I like to tell people around here is budget is just funny money. But it is a necessary evil and a requirement that agencies have for planning purposes. So don't worry about the individual years. We will be monitoring you at the total approved grant budget and grant budget categories. We're going to be talking about budget change requests a little later. We have decided to move to the total budget level instead of the annual level, and let me tell you, this has reduced greatly the number of budget change requests that are required on both sides. So you will have to do fewer of them. We will have to review and approve fewer of them. So I think that change was very positive for both of us. Let's see. Along with the budget plan that you see here, we do ask for a budget narrative, also broken down by year. This is a plan. This is how you are planning to spend the money start out from your grant. We do know and are completely aware that things change. This is not in concrete. This is tentative. By opening up to the annual or the total budget, we have given you flexibility to spend and use your money as you see fit, as required by your research project, without having to go through us to have budget changes. So we do realize that things change, and we want to give you that flexibility to move money from one category to another due to either unforeseen circumstances or something that has changed, an unplanned expenditure, or to avoid being in a deficit situation, is what the budget change request forms are for. So we ask you to put some thought and effort into this to really detail how you are planning to proceed with your research project and how the money and associated costs will be spent accordingly. So this is a well thought out budget plan, how you plan to spend your money. So as I said, we ask for this to be broken down by year, but don't hold you to it. One of the things that, because this is very labor intensive, obviously salaries and fringes or benefits are going to be probably a good portion of your costs. And one of the requirements that we need to keep in mind regarding that is that we cannot exceed the federal executive 2 pay scale, and currently the maximum for that is $189,600. But I have seen this already. You need to make sure that you are using the level that it was at the time that your funding opportunity announcement came out. Not necessarily what is that rate today. It's what it was when you actually applied for this. So I know we've had to return a few budgets because they had exceeded this number. So please keep that in mind. Let's see. Here's the budget. Okay, institutional approvals. IRB, IACUC, IBC, radiation safety reviews. All of those must be approved before research can take place if any of those are applicable to your research project. If you have applied for an approval but it has not been received yet, there is a requirement that you send us 30-day status updates until this approval has been received. So please keep that in mind. That's very important that you keep us in the loop as to where that is. Yes, you can begin your research project if you are going to be working on other areas that do not impact these specific approvals. So yes, you can get started, but not in these certain areas. Oh, and the other thing, we are having a big problem with this, and that is your awarded project title. Your DOH project title must match the project title on your institutional approval. I have seen several where they have like an NIH approval and they kind of like piggyback DOH's grant on top of that, but the titles are not matching. And I know it is extra time and effort, but that's a requirement. The titles must match exactly. And that's it for me.
Okay. Teresa, can you put back up the budget for just a minute? And this is Bonnie. I just wanted to go over, when you submit your budget, it has two different levels of review. Your grant manager will review it, and then based on the position that I hold, I have to review and approve your budget. And then you see my name down there at the bottom right. So if we come back to you with questions, just please know that we're trying to assure that we get it right the first time, because once it goes into, we just want to catch any problems up front to avoid some of the longer paperwork kinds of changes. And in particular, we're looking for the other category, which includes sometimes the participant payments. And we're looking at supplies and equipment.
Travel.
And travel. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Karen. And so if you get phone calls from us, we're not questioning to influence any changes in your research, but we're asking questions because something doesn't look quite right to us, and we want to make sure it just was not like a typo or some other kind of issue. So just know that we're trying to start things off on the right foot and get it right the first time, or as close to right as the first time, and then we can always do the change request towards the end.
One of the things that we've learned recently is that the Department of Financial Services is coming down hard on everybody in the state. And some of the support documentation that they now require to get these grantee invoices paid is a copy of this approved grant budget that we're looking at and your budget narrative. They want to see these specific expenditures like participant payments, like that you had this travel planned. They want to see this detail in your budget and your budget narrative. So we are having to send this at times to the Department of Financial Services as support documentation along with your invoice and your other deliverables. So there's lots of eyes on it.
Yeah, lots of eyes. Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay, and I think I'm next. Yeah. All right. So we're going to start with some fundamentals, with some definitions. The department is us, the Florida Department of Health, otherwise known as the Department of Public Health Research, Biomedical Research Section. It could be referred to as the program, as staff. They're all interchangeable. I would suggest that you may want, just as reference, making a couple copies of this PowerPoint presentation to use as reference. The grant manager is a point of contact here at the department. If you have a question, your grant manager should be the first person that you contact. And working together, we will get the answer that you need. We have 2 grant liaisons that are also on our team. They serve the role, the function of a grant manager, but they don't have signatory authority. So I sign off on all of their documents. So you'll see the quarterly reports being signed off by me instead of your point of contact. And that's okay. That's just the bureaucratic world that we live in. So don't let that cause any stress to you. Terms and conditions. The department is also, the state of Florida is known for having contracts. For the research grants, they're called terms and conditions. Both are legally binding between the grantee, which is the research institution, and the Florida Department of Health. And it talks in it legal terms, conditions that are, some revisions are made annually, usually it's pretty minimal, reviewed and approved by our general counsel, and a variety of other executive leadership before it is ever used as an official document. So please know that we work hard to try to have standard, well-written and approved documents. And the terms and conditions will be same for all of you grant recipients. The attachments will be different in that you may have a 2-year grant, you may have a 5-year grant. So those are the kind of unique specifications that will be attachments. Property and equipment. This is an area that causes people some questions. If it's tangible property or equipment that will be around longer than 1 year and cost $1,000 or more, it's equipment. So high-powered computers, they're going to be equipment. If you can get a laptop for less than $1,000, it's not necessarily it's not equipment. You would put that in the other category. It would be supply. Other. I'm sorry, I'm questioning myself. Oh, it should be in supplies. Okay. Whereas purchasing equipment is not a problem, but for your budget and working out your budget numbers, just wanted to provide that tidbit to you.
And we give you that clarification because a lot of you are probably familiar with the federal definition or threshold of equipment, which is $5,000. The state of Florida's threshold and definition is $1,000, and that's why we use the $1,000 threshold, is because of the state definition. Okay.
Okay, after your budget and budget narrative is reviewed and approved, terms and conditions will be drafted. Once again, I was talking about the attachments. Attachment 1 and 2 are the customized according to the specifications of your awarded grant project. 1 year versus 3 years versus 5 years. Certainly it would impact your payment cycle, right? Because it's all based on quarterly fixed price payments. All terms and conditions are internally reviewed, and then they are uploaded into DocuSign for electronic signature. It's really important for you to use DocuSign because it alerts the grant manager at every step. And if we have a grant that's in the routing process in DocuSign and we notice that we haven't seen any activity in a couple of weeks, we can go in DocuSign and see where is it in process. So if there's been a holdup somewhere within the department, we can reach out to that person and see if they have questions or whatever it might be. And it's also the same when it gets sent when it's sent to you all for signature as well. And in the sponsored research office, they have lots to do, and just we want to remind them if it appears that it has been with them for a couple weeks or longer. Execution timing is imperative. Until the Department of Health is the final signature, your terms and conditions are not executed. And so there will be a copy sent to all the interested parties at your research institution after it is executed. But so you need to know that because you can't have budget charges that are before the grant was executed. So work closely with your SRO and grant offices, stay in close contact with them so everybody starts off on the right side. Once the grant is executed, once again, it's that legally binding document that's been signed by both parties, it then becomes effective. And when that happens, then the department will also encumber your funds. And what that means is we alert everybody involved in the payment cycle that your grant has been executed and charges are now valid. All right. The attachment 2 is the schedule of deliverables. As I mentioned before, and as Karen had stated, if you have a 3-year grant, you will get quarterly, you'll have the 12 payments for those 3 years, quarterly payments, and it could go longer than 3 fiscal years, depending on when it was executed. So think of it as quarterly in helping you plan. Okay, so your payments will be divided equally per quarter. It's the final payment. Well, let me step back. Don't worry about, okay, if your quarterly payment is $100,000 and you've only spent $75,000 in a quarter, don't worry about it. It's a fixed price, fixed fee. At the final payment is when we do a reconciliation to determine the actual amount that has been spent over the lifetime of your grant. And so what does that mean? The final payment, after we do the reconciliation throughout the life of your grant, will determine, based on what you've spent, that maybe your final payment won't be $100,000. It might be $50,000 based on the total expenditures over the life of your grant. Now, if for some reason, if the unspent funds exceed the final payment, then you will either not receive a payment or you may owe the department a refund. So that is important for you to know. Once again, final payment equals reconciliation. Okay, for the quarterly, annual, and final deliverables, they're required progress reports and budget, your budget and budget expenditures on a quarterly basis. The annual Florida Legislative Report is a requirement in statute. The reason we ask for the kind of information that we do, and you'll receive a template for this, is because it's outlined in Florida statute. They want to know about your publications. They want to know about your patents. They want to know about your progress, publications. I think I just said that. Okay, and any follow-on funding. They're also interested in collaborations and training of the next generation of researchers. And then the final deliverables is really a cumulative report on all the great work that you have completed. I just wanted to mention that in the first legislative report, because of the timing of executing this year's grants and the nine JKs, we will be using your general audience abstract as your submission for our legislative required report. If you submit, that's what we'll be using for this first annual report. It is required to be submitted by December 15th. That also is in Florida statute. It is sent to the Senate President's office, the House Chair, and Speaker of the House, excuse me, and the Governor. And it is a representation of the work that is done in biomedical research. In future years, please note that what you put in the annual legislative report, which is progress on your grant, that will go and be available to any elected official that would like to review it. It becomes public record, and it's a reflection of the work that you're doing. So it is your time to shine. Next page. All right. Let's talk about part of the required quarterly deliverables. So the Department of Health receives and reviews quarterly reports and invoices and your expenditures. Those are submitted to the Department of Health Finance and Accounting Office. They serve as an audit in an audit function, and from there it is submitted for payment to the Department of Financial Services. The Department of Financial Services is the one that actually pushes the button, so to speak, to pay you. The Department of Financial Services are also auditors, but the Department of Financial Services audits everything from contracts for housekeeping to, in a state office building as an example, to pharmaceuticals that are purchased through our public health pharmacy, to research grants, and everything in between. I say that because they're not specialists, and it is their job to really review closely, but the thing is sometimes they don't understand what they're reviewing. So we have had several meetings with the Department of Financial Services, and we have another one next week in our attempt to continue to provide them education on research participant incentives, why participants receive incentives, what the importance is, and why it is devastating to a research study and individuals that are participating in a research study if a change has to be made to participant payments. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Participant payments, they're limited to $36 per participant per day. I know the number seems odd, I agree. But that relates to basically the meals that someone that's traveling for a full day would receive in travel reimbursement. Through negotiation, we were able to get DFS to understand that the level of review and monitoring that occurs when there's a research participant is done at many different levels. It's done at the IRB level, it is done at the Department of Health level, and all of these checks and balances that are listed on this screen. Now, that last sentence, these are not medical costs. If some kind of a payment is due to a participant that is related to medical costs, that you really need to clarify, because that's different. Just like paying for like a lab test would not be a participant incentive. All of these, the IRB approval, a copy of the consent form, and the distribution payment log without personal information is required with all quarterly reports. That has helped. Tuition waivers. Okay. Do we have a sample? Oh, okay. Never mind about it. Tuition waivers. There needs to be an attestation from the PI with their signature, including the name of the student, number of hours, hourly rate, letter of appointment, and transaction detail. There needs to be, once again, the checks and balance that when someone is reviewing your invoice, that they understand that John Smith is a member of the research team under the direction of Dr. Frank, and that the PI, Dr. Frank, agrees with the classes that he's taking. Okay, so really it should only have to be done once a quarter, or once a semester. Okay, subcontract. These are state funds. These funds were intended to improve the infrastructure of research in Florida. 100% of the work for a subcontract is pre-approved, but also they want to see the work occurring in Florida. The only exception that can be granted is that you will have to prove that this service is only provided outside of the state, and it must be less than 10% of the grant amount. I know there's some highly specialized laboratories in the country where researchers go for specific tests, and it's not available anywhere else. That's the kind of information that we need. Okay, travel. The state of Florida will only reimburse for $150 a night. And if it's associated with a meeting or something, you know, you're doing business. If the lodging is over $150 a night, you will need 3 quotes from surrounding hotels. And you need to do that at the time that you are booking your reservation, not after the fact, because then it's not really a representation of what the rates were like at that particular time. The lesser of the 3 quotes will be used for reimbursement of travel if it's over $150 a night. You know, you may choose to use one of the higher quotes and then deduct the difference from your reimbursement. If it's for a conference or a meeting, which probably means it's got an associated registration fee, we're going to need the agenda and the schedule of events. If you are presenting, you can provide either the presentation or an abstract, whatever is easier. Okay. Vehicles. If you use your own vehicle and you're going to be going more than 65 miles away or driving in a day, there is a privately owned vehicle form that needs to be completed. We're going to go to the grant forms. Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to go to the grant forms and show you these in just a minute.
That form is on the website.
You can just get it. Oh, that was posted. Okay. All right. We'll go to the grant forms library, and we'll show you where it is. We need documentation and receipts of all expenses and must reflect a 0 balance. The traveler and supervisor needs to sign the state of Florida voucher for reimbursement, and then we have to approve it as well. I do have one caveat though on the Florida voucher for reimbursement of travel expenses. It does indicate a Social Security number, but we don't need that. Okay. Yes. Okay, we talked about this. I'm just going to mention it really very briefly. The legislative progress report. So, scientific abstract explaining your research performed during the time. All acronyms must be defined, even if it's a chemical compound. We've been asked that many times. Once again, the legislators are not scientists. There are very few that are in the healthcare field. So we really need as plain language as possible. I know in some instances it's downright almost impossible. So just remember your audience. Annually, you also need to submit the certificate of liability insurance for your organization. Final deliverables, cumulative report, final financial report, expenditures for the life of the grant. And the final invoices for the invoice period, and not to exceed all costs associated with the project. Plain language is appreciated.
Can I mention something real quick?
Yes, please.
We will give you quarterly reminders as your grant manager as a courtesy. Once the invoicing period has ended, usually within that first week of the following month, you will receive a reminder email as to what is required that it'll be due in approximately 30 days or by the end of the month. And we try to keep track of who we should be copying on this. So it's your financial people, it's the people that are managing the grant, it's your the research department. Anyways, if you could provide us with any names of individuals that you would like for us to copy on these reminders or to keep in the loop on these, please feel free to send us an email or give us a call and let us know to add so-and-so onto these reminders. But we try our best to remind you on a quarterly basis of what's due and when it's due.
All right, and now we have Teresa Matthew, who has lead working with the Biomedical Research Advisory Council, lead on the funding opportunity announcements, and serves as a grant manager.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the change requests that you might encounter throughout the life of your grant. So the first one is a budget change request. This one is probably the easiest one to do. It's a simple one-page form. We'll show you a copy of it when we go to the Grant Management Forms library. But it'll essentially look like the table which you had in your approved grant budget. Similar to that, you'll have a column then that will show your total amount from your original budget. The next column will show what's changed, and then the final column will show your new totals. And the reasons that you would do that is if you were going to have an overage in any one of your total categories. So let's say that you had an unexpected expense that came up in equipment or supplies, and it was going to push you over your original amount. You would need to submit a budget change request to us, and then receive the approved budget change request before you start that new spending. So it sometimes does happen where the cart is put before the horse, but ideally you really should be submitting this type of request before you make any of that additional spending. And then use those new numbers in your new report. So in your quarterly financial report should have the new total in the leftmost column of numbers. So that's the easiest one. We can get those approved in a day if you do it correctly. So please, if that's something that you need to do, please get in touch with your grant manager and we can take care of that for you very quickly. The next one is sometimes related to a budget change. So a change in key personnel or change in effort request. So let's say that one of your key personnel is leaving the project. You would need to get in touch with us to let us know. This may involve an amendment to the terms and conditions, especially if it's the corresponding principal investigator who is leaving the institution. Let's hope that doesn't happen because that can be kind of an ordeal to work through, but it is something that we can work through and have worked through in the past. So let's say that you're cutting the effort from one of your key personnel. Let's say that they are going down in effort, or they could be going up in effort. This would then be tied to a budget change request, and so you would have to submit both of those documents in order to move forward. A protocol change request, this is something that happens less frequently, and hopefully we will keep it that way, but it is something that we have to accommodate because science is fluid and research is fluid, and so we need to be able to accommodate that. So let's say that you have a major change in aim. You need to contact the department before you move forward with this change. We awarded the grant based upon the aims that were included in the proposal, and your proposal was scored against its competitors. It was awarded based upon the research that was presented in the proposal. So a major change like that needs to come to us first before you move forward. and that could involve a change to the terms and conditions. So communicate with your grant manager. This is really the bottom line to everything. And then the final change is a no-cost extension. This would involve a definite change to an amendment to the terms and conditions because we are changing the due date of the final set of deliverables under attachment 2. So get in touch with your grant manager. The forms for all of these things are on the website. You can request no more than one no-cost extension of up to 6 months. So there is that. Okay, we're going to move on to financial considerations for prompt payment. So as mentioned in the previous slide, your grant manager is your point of contact. They are required to review, approve, and submit invoices and deliverables within 5 working days. But that's assuming that everything is 100% correct, which is rarely the case. So many times we will receive a partial set of deliverables, or there will be something that's incorrect within the set of deliverables. There could be arithmetic errors, there could be supporting documentation that's missing. All of these things end up stopping the clock on our end, and then the ball gets bounced back to you, and you need to provide that additional documentation or correct the errors before we can move on. So those are some of those reasons for delays. The most common delays include, as we've mentioned in previous slides, the lack of participant incentive documentation. That is huge. DFS is really, really being very, very careful in scrutinizing that, as well as the travel documentation. You need to fill out your travel voucher correctly and have the correct supporting documentation to go along with it, including all of your receipts. And then tuition is another one that has been a big issue for getting these cleared correctly. So the good news is that you have a friend at the department and your grant manager, and they can help you through these things so that hopefully you don't get any deductions. Okay. Financial consequences, unfortunately, this is something that we have to deal with from time to time. They may occur if violations of the terms and conditions are present. So if you don't submit your deliverables by the due dates that are outlined in attachment 2, that could result in financial consequences 10% per invoice. Let's say that you are not compliant with submitting all of your deliverables. That could also result in a financial consequence. So these, like I mentioned so many times before, your grant manager is there to help you, so please be in touch with them. So often these delays are a result of just a misunderstanding of what is required of you. So some examples of non-compliance include failure to secure appropriate institutional approvals. So let's say that you, let's hope that you have not moved forward with any human subjects research without IRB approval, but that could be an issue of non-compliance. Late submissions of deliverables, lack of scientific progress. We do have in-house experts who review your quarterly reports, and if there is no progress being made, they might not approve your progress report. And then lack of prior approval. Don't move forward with a change in aims or protocol or a personnel change without informing us first. That would be considered non-compliance. Okay. So I'm going to turn it back to Karen for some final reminders.
Okay. I can't stress this enough, is probably the most important thing is that you become very familiar with your terms and conditions. If you don't have a copy of your executed terms and conditions, please let your grant manager know, and we will be sure to get one to you. Especially look at attachment 2. Those are going to be your schedule of deliverables and payments, and it'll tell you what is due, when it's due, and the period that's covered. Another good thing that you have as a resource is going to be your funding opportunity announcement, as well as we have prepared a grant administration manual for you. So these 3 resources should be able to answer almost any question that you have. If you call us with a question, these are the 3 places that we're first going to consult. So if you want to just save some time and take a look at these yourself, feel free to do so. We all know that occasionally you would like to talk to a real person. I know we have all been extremely frustrated with the automated voicemail messages of press 1 for so-and-so, press 2, get me back to the main menu, I just want to talk to somebody, and not being able to do that is very frustrating. So we are real people, we are not robots. We are here to help you, and we are always available to assist you in any way that we can. You can feel free to email us at the Biomedical Research inbox or give us a call. We're here to assist you as you go through and make your way through your research project. So please use us as a resource. Okay.
Okay, so this is just an overview of who the assigned grant managers are, who the assigned grant managers are for each of the King grants specifically. So if you have not been in touch with your grant manager yet, please get to know them. They're there to help. We have the contact information for Bonnie, her email address and phone number, and then general inquiries can be sent to research@flhealth.gov. Bonnie, do you want us to go to questions or look at the grant management forms library?
Why don't you go ahead and click on the link to the forms library, and then maybe we can do questions around the same time too.
Okay.
But just as a quick overview, okay, all of the change forms, your quarterly deliverable forms, annual report forms, final report forms, lots of required travel form information, so that you can, it's all there. And okay, I was looking for something. Okay. Oh, and like we were talking about, the using your personal vehicle worksheet, that's on there, rental car versus POV worksheet. So everything is there, and that last one, the Department of Health travel guidelines, is very comprehensive, and it's actually in a fairly small document, which is nice. But so anyways, that's very helpful as well.
Okay.
So why don't we go to questions?
We do have a few questions. There's, I think, the first one, for budget purposes, when we prepare the updated budget for the terms and conditions, what start date can we use?
That is a very good question. We have been struggling with this, and we go through this every time we go through an award cycle. I would allow for at least 2 months to get everything approved and executed. Probably that is going to be my best advice, is that you allow 2 months of administrative approvals from start to finish. So if you could plan accordingly.
Yeah, and we have some that are already executed.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, it's all about, how quickly information gets in.
Right, right.
Let's see. For the budget, should those of us submitting proposals this month submit our proposal budget by fiscal year as we showed here? That would cut down on the revisions that you'll have to do in the post-award process if you do get awarded. So that would be not something where it would be like giving a little gift to yourself. But that's not going to be something that would be disqualifying you if you don't do it that way. The major thing that we need to look at when we are when we look at the budget, we need to be sure that the budget and the budget narrative are complete and there. And our peer reviewers do look at that to be sure that there is enough budget to accommodate the research that's being done. So yeah, that's not something that would be a disqualifying issue, but it would be a little gift to yourself if you do it the way and to us if you do it the way that was outlined in the thing. Okay. A few more questions, and then we need to go. So the scientific abstract for this in plain language, really, it's the general audience abstract. Sorry, if we spoke earlier in the scientific abstract, we meant general audience abstract.
Yes. Yes.
And then will you share this presentation doc, please? Yes, we will make this available on the program website. And the recording, we will be downloading and making a link available for that in the very near future. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap this up. So if you have other questions, please send them to the research inbox, and we will respond to them as quickly as we can.
Thank you for calling in. And once again, with Bonnie Gone-Bailey, Karen Schneckenberger, and Teresa Matthew. And all of our contact information is available. So good luck to you. We want to see you do well. Have a great weekend. Bye.